Welcome back to the history of the papacy in 10 minutes or less, or at least we try. Definitely no more than 15 minutes. Today we're going to talk about none other than the Cadaver Synod, a very difficult yet intriguing episode of the history of the popes of Rome, Christianity, religion, European history, and even really world history. It really surprises me at sometimes where this terrible event in history isn't more widely known. It's a very bizarre incident in papal and Christian history with a ton of context behind it. If you'd like a longer presentation of this sordid tale, click below to find out more, where you can find a link to full audio and a full video presentation of this unique event. Let's call it unique. First off, we really have a problem of historiography. It's hard to say what really happened or get into the heads of all the people involved, but we'll try. There's not many sources for this time, and we're getting towards we're right in the middle of the so-called Dark Ages here, where chronicles were written later with possible mystical or miraculous elements involved. Let's talk a little bit about the players. We have a pope named Formosus who reigned from 891 to 896, and ironically, Formosus means beautiful or handsome in Latin. He had on top of his papal career up to 896, he also had a very full career after being pope, which I can only think of one or two of them who's had a career like that. Then we have Pope Stephen VI, who reigned from 896 to 897. He's a very politically connected person to a factional alliance that was very much aligned against Pope Formosus. Let's talk about the political context. You don't get to the Cadaver Synod without some great political upheaval. It's a very complicated political picture in the 9th century Italy, central Italy. The papacy was the nexus of a number of political struggles between the Franks, the Kingdom of the Lombards, the Byzantine Empire, and more. That we've got secular and political politics all intertwined here. The papacy wanted political independence for its own papal states, but it needed to play these powerful factions off of each other. Sometimes allies with one, sometimes enemies. Internal factions also rocked the papacy and the papal states, which would make things even more complicated. We're talking about religious conflict with a political element or political conflict with a religious element. By this point in the 9th century, the East and the West, the Byzantine-Latin divide, had really been developing, and each had its own sphere of influence. Byzantines in Greece and the Balkan Peninsula and points eastward, Latin and Germanic to the north and the west in Europe, but many areas up for grabs still. The papacy connected strongly with the Western Latin Germanic, but with long historical ties to Byzantium. Formosus was right in the middle of this conflict. Now, we'll just take it for granted. A group called the Bulgarians settled in the area right near Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire. Becoming Christian was the way to plug into Roman, Eastern or Western, but larger Mediterranean culture, political and economics. Constantinople felt the Bulgarians were in their area of influence. The Bulgarians, they wanted to hedge their bets. They invited the Pope in Rome to send an emissary from Rome to their court. And Pope Formosus, who wasn't the Pope at that time, sent Formosus, who wasn't Pope yet, to be their emissary. And he, at this point, he was the bishop of a city called Porto, an important city. Formosus went and he loved it, and the Bulgarians loved him. The Bulgarians wanted Formosus to be named their metropolitan bishop, kind of the bishop of the Bulgarians. This would have brought Bulgaria into the Western or Latin, Western Roman sphere of influence. It's really a huge pickup for the Roman papacy. Formosus wanted to be named the metropolitan bishop of the Bulgarians too. To him, it was a win-win, right? It was an enormous career move for him, and it really would have shifted him to just nominally under papal control. There's a problem, though. There was a long-standing canonical tradition. bishops were not allowed to move from one bishopric to the next. That was the technical term for that was called translation. And it was really meant to stop churchmen from moving up the career ladder. The idea was that they should really focus on doing a good job of being the bishop of where they were. Many in Rome didn't want to see Formosus translated because it was uncanonical, and it would have also given Formosus a huge increase in power, which, and probably for a lot of these bishops, they wanted it. Hey, why not me? The papacy, at that point, the Pope dragged his feet for too long, and Constantinople named a bishop to Bulgaria. In the meantime, though, Formosus didn't stop trying to accumulate power. He tried to become Pope in 872, but lost a very bitter struggle with another Pope. Such an ugly fight that Formosus was excommunicated, but Formosus still had a very powerful faction and was pretty quickly readmitted into communion. Fun fact, John VIII was the first pope to be assassinated, but not the last by any stretch. Formosus finally gets himself elected in 892, when he was probably in about his mid-70s. He had a fairly uneventful papacy. An important thing to remember, though, is Formosus was translated from the bishopric of Porto to the papacy, or the bishopric of Rome. Technically still uncanonical and very unusual, but slowly being accepted into normalcy. But it still could be considered really a big anomaly and really not a good thing to do. As we said, he wasn't anything special of a pope, he wasn't terrible, and he was a decent administrator. Another quick fun fact, the pope after Formosus, Boniface, died after 15 or 16 days as pope, so he had the second shortest papal reign ever, which gets us to Stephen VI. He was made bishop of a place called Anagni sometime during the reign of Formosus. Formosus did it. You can think, hey, that's great, I was made a bishop. But also Anagni was sort of a way out of the place. And so Formosus was probably being seen to putting a rival like Stephen onto the back burner. And hopefully people saying, hey, you can't get translated to any place better. Remember, no translations, or translations at least, are not normal. Stephen was a big ally to the powerful Lombard kingdom of Spoleto, which Formosus was enemies with. And I could go on and on about this political dynamic, but for our purposes here, just remember, very charged situation. This is a lot of setup for the Cadaver Synod, but we need to try and get into the heads of all these people who died over 1,000 years ago. Stephen, after Formosus's death, brought up Formosus on a number of charges, including perjury, coveting the papacy, and various other charges. Trying someone posthumously was not without precedent. Early in Christianity, it was frowned upon, but it became more popular as the ages went by. There was an innovation at the Cadaver Synod, though, digging up the dead body of the accused, Formosus, dressing him up in his papal vestments, and placing him in the synod hall for trial. Jean-Paul Laurent has a famous painting from the 1870s of this event that's not quite accurate, because Formosus was only dead for about 6 to 8 months. He would not have looked like Skeletor. He would have been more bloated and putrefying and covered in bugs during this whole event. So the trial... during this trial, Stephen was the lead prosecutor, and he's just screaming and foaming at the mouth at the dead Formosus, who's propped up in his chair right in the middle of the St. John Lateran Cathedral. Formosus did have a defense. He had a junior, probably very young deacon standing behind him answering Stephen's questions. The jury was all of the Roman clergy dressed in their full regalia. So just picture this thing in your mind of a pope screaming and smashing and tearing at his garments and literally frothing at his mouth. All of these people sitting there like, oh, what's going on here? With a junior deacon who's probably scared out of his wits, answering for Stephen, like maybe behind him, like, like very odd. Big shock. Formosus is found guilty. His body's mutilated and he's ceremonially thrown into the Tiber River. All of Formosus's acts as pope were reversed, including all of the bishops he named, including Stephen himself. So Stephen's unbishoped, if you will, defrocked maybe, I don't know what you would call that, but then immediately repoped. Why did this event happen? How could it happen? Everything up to the trial can be explained. Stephen was an extreme partisan. He wanted Formosus punished. Also, he wanted to reverse Formosus's naming of bishops, namely himself, so that Stephen wouldn't be considered a translated bishop to Pope of Rome. Remember, this is still considered, at the very least, something that shouldn't be done. So it's making Stephen's papacy really borderline illegitimate. So up to that point, a posthumous trial is definitely explainable, kind of reasonable too. Putting the dead body of Formosus in person is another story. It shows a level of just hatred and anger. We don't have the sources, but Stephen must have been at least partially mentally unhinged based on the document evidence of his behavior at the synod. Stephen, anyways, was very shortly assassinated, and again, we don't really know why, but this trial very much could have been part of the reason. The next 100 or so years would not be good for the papacy. This era is called the pornocracy, a very low point for the history of the papacy and the popes of Rome, but that's a different story for a different day. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and ring the bell so you can get more videos like this of the history of the papacy in 10 minutes or less, hopefully less.